Jake Harrison sat in the small chair that barely fit his human frame. The chair was made for beings much smaller than humans, but that was typical in the Galactic Council chambers. Everything here reminded humans of their place in the galaxy, which was nowhere important at all. The massive crystal dome stretched high above, filled with floating platforms where the important species held their meetings. Down below, in the shadows near the floor, sat the representatives of the lesser races. Jake had been sitting in these shadows for 3 years now, watching and listening as the great powers of the galaxy decided the fate of worlds. Today was different, though. Today, Chancellor Zexthul of the Vorthak Empire was presenting his latest demand. The Chancellor stood on the central platform, his 4 arms spread wide, his snake-like body coiled beneath him. His 3 eyes gleamed as he spoke in the clicking, hissing language of his people. The translation came through Jake's earpiece a moment later. "Honored members of the Council," the Chancellor began, "the Vorthak Empire requests immediate transfer of the Kepler sector to our control. This region contains valuable minerals that our growing civilization requires." Jake felt his jaw tighten. The Kepler sector contained 3 human colonies: New Denver, Port Liberty, and Greenfield Station. Nearly 2 million humans called those worlds home. They had been there for 20 years, building farms and cities, raising families. The crystalline hegemony representative, a being that looked like living glass, spoke next. Elder Quell's voice sounded like wind chimes. "What of the current inhabitants of these worlds?" Chancellor Zexthul's mandibles clicked in what Jake had learned was amusement. "The sector is inhabited by humans. They are a primitive species that joined our confederation only 50 years ago. They have contributed nothing of value to galactic civilization. They lack advanced technology, military strength, or cultural significance. Surely their minor presence should not prevent the Vorthak Empire from accessing resources we can actually use." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. The floating jellyfish-like beings of the Aquatic Union pulsed with colors that Jake knew meant approval. The metal-skinned techno-collective representatives clicked their mechanical parts in what passed for nodding. Fleet Commander Blue Wave of the Aquatic Union spoke next, her voice bubbling through her water-filled helmet. "The human species is indeed new to our community. What significant contributions have they made that would justify denying the Vorthak Empire's reasonable request?" More clicking and humming filled the air as other species voiced their support. Jake had sat through dozens of these sessions. He knew how they worked. The big powers made their deals and everyone else had to live with the results. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak had no choice but to accept it. But today would be different. Jake stood up slowly. His movement caught the attention of a few nearby representatives, but most of the council continued their discussions. He raised his hand, requesting permission to speak. "The human representative wishes to address the council," announced the session moderator, a floating cloud of gas that served as one of the neutral arbiters. Chancellor Zexthul turned his 3 eyes toward Jake. The look was one of mild annoyance, like someone had interrupted his dinner with unimportant news. "Very well. Let the humans speak. Perhaps they wish to negotiate terms for their relocation." Jake activated his platform's communication system. His voice carried clearly through the chamber, translated instantly into the hundreds of languages represented in the council. "Honored members," Jake began, his voice calm and steady. "I have listened to this discussion with great interest. The Vorthak Empire believes that humans have nothing to offer this galaxy. They see us as weak, primitive, and worthless." "An accurate assessment," Chancellor Zexthul interrupted, causing ripples of what passed for laughter from several species. Jake continued as if he hadn't heard. "The Chancellor believes that might makes right, that the strong can simply take what they want from the weak. This has been the way of galactic politics for centuries. It is the natural order," Elder Quell chimed in. "Resources flow to those who can best utilize them." "I see," Jake said, nodding slowly. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with as many representatives as possible. "Then I suppose there is only one response the United Earth Federation can make to this situation." He paused, letting the silence stretch. Every eye, sensor, and detection organ in the chamber focused on him. Even the background humming of the life support system seemed to quiet. The United Earth Federation hereby declares war on the Vorthak Empire, effective immediately. The silence that followed was absolute. For nearly 10 seconds, not a single being in the chamber moved or made a sound. Jake could hear his own heartbeat in the stillness. Then Chancellor Zexthul began to laugh. It was a horrible sound, like steam escaping from a broken pipe mixed with the rattle of chains. Other council members joined in, creating a symphony of alien amusement that echoed through the crystal dome. War? The Chancellor finally managed to say through his laughter. You declare war? With what army? Human? Your entire species has perhaps a dozen military vessels. The Vorthak Empire commands over 300 ships of the line, each one capable of destroying entire planets. The laughter continued. Fleet Commander Blue Wave's colors shifted to bright yellow patterns that indicated hilarity. The Techno-Collective representatives were making rapid clicking sounds that served as their version of chuckling. Jake waited for the noise to die down. When it finally did, he spoke again, his voice still perfectly calm. You asked with what? Army, Chancellor. That's a very good question. He smiled slightly. I suppose you'll find out. This is ridiculous, Elder Quell said, her crystalline form dimming with what Jake recognized as irritation. The human representative is clearly unwell. Perhaps their species has suffered some kind of mental breakdown. Or perhaps, suggested the nebuloid representative, its gaseous form swirling with agitation. They simply do not understand the realities of galactic politics. They are, after all, quite new to our civilization. Chancellor Zexthul raised one of his forearms and the chamber fell quiet again. Human, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. I will give you one opportunity to withdraw this foolish declaration. The Vorthak Empire has no wish to waste time and resources destroying your pathetic military. Surrender the Kepler sector peacefully, and your species may continue to exist in whatever small corner of the galaxy we decide to leave you. Jake looked up at the Chancellor for a long moment. Around them, hundreds of alien representatives waited for his response. Some seemed amused, others appeared bored. A few looked almost sympathetic to what they saw as a desperate species making a final futile gesture. Chancellor Zexthul, Jake said finally, I thank you for your generous offer. However, the United Earth Federation's position remains unchanged. We are at war. He turned to address the entire council. I want every species in this chamber to remember this moment. Remember that when the Vorthak Empire demanded our worlds, we did not beg. We did not offer bribes or seek powerful patrons to hide behind. We declared war, on a force 50 times your size, the Chancellor pointed out, still amused. Yes, Jake agreed. We declared war on a force 50 times our size. I wonder what that says about us as a species. The chamber erupted in discussion as representatives began talking among themselves. Jake could see the confusion on many faces. Some species seemed impressed by human bravery, others by human stupidity. Most just seemed puzzled. Chancellor Zexthul slammed his tail against his platform, creating a sharp crack that echoed through the dome. Enough! This farce has continued long enough. The Vorthak Empire will take the Kepler sector by force if necessary. Human resistance will be crushed within days. Perhaps, Jake said. But I suspect this war will surprise everyone in ways they cannot imagine. He sat back down in his small chair, leaving the council to continue their debate. As the session continued around him, Jake activated a small communication device hidden in his jacket. He sent a simple, pre-arranged message to Earth. The die is cast. Within hours, that message would reach Admiral Ryan Burke aboard the battleship UES Constitution. It would activate plans that had been years in the making. It would begin a war, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. But for now, Jake Harrison simply sat in his small chair in the shadows, listening to the alien voices above debating humanity's fate, and smiling a very small, very confident smile. The news of humanity's war declaration spread across the galaxy faster than anyone expected. On Harmony Point, the diplomatic station that served as neutral ground for interspecies meetings, Ambassador Lisa Carter found herself busier than she had ever been in her 15-year career. Her communication board lit up like a Christmas tree. 17 different species wanted emergency meetings. The messages all asked the same basic question, though each species phrased it differently. The crystalline hegemony sent a formal inquiry about human mental stability. The Aquatic Union wanted to know if Earth had been infected by some kind of madness plague. The Techno Collective simply asked for data to explain the illogical human behavior. Lisa sat in her small office looking at the list of meeting requests. She had been expecting this. In fact, she had been preparing for exactly this situation for 3 years. Like every human diplomat, she had received special training for what they called Day Zero, the day humanity would stop being quiet and polite members of the Galactic Confederation. Her first meeting was with Ambassador Crix of the Silicon Collective. Crix looked like a walking crystal sculpture, tall and elegant, with a voice that sounded like gentle music. The Silicon Collective was one of the older species in the galaxy, known for their wisdom and careful thinking. Ambassador Carter, Crix began, settling into the specially designed chair in Lisa's office. My people are concerned about recent human actions. The declaration of war against the Vorthak Empire seems unwise. Lisa had practiced this conversation many times. In what way, Ambassador Crix? The mathematical reality is simple, Crix replied, his crystalline features shifting to show what humans had learned was confusion. Human military forces number approximately 12 battlecruisers and 40 support vessels. The Vorthak Empire commands over 300 ships of the line. The outcome of direct military confrontation is predetermined. You're absolutely right about the numbers, Lisa agreed. But who said anything about direct military confrontation? Crix paused, processing this information. I do not understand. How else does one conduct war? That's a very interesting question, Lisa said. How do you think humans have survived and thrived on Earth for so long? We weren't the strongest species on our planet. We weren't the fastest or the most heavily armed, yet we became the dominant life form. Through tool use and social cooperation, Crix answered immediately. Exactly. We learned to work together and to understand our environment better than any other species. We studied our predators and our prey. We learned their habits, their weaknesses, their fears. We didn't win through strength, we won through knowledge. Meanwhile, in human space, Admiral Ryan Burke stood on the bridge of the UES Constitution, reading the sealed orders that had just been delivered to him. The orders were marked with the highest security classification and had been prepared years ago, waiting for this exact moment. The orders revealed something that would have shocked every member of the Galactic Council. Humanity had not spent their 50 years in galactic society simply trying to fit in and make friends. They had been studying, learning, and preparing for exactly this situation. Every cultural exchange program had been carefully planned. Every trade negotiation had been recorded and analyzed. Every scientific collaboration had been an opportunity to gather intelligence. Human diplomats, traders, scientists, and tourists had been observing alien behavior patterns, studying social structures, and mapping the complex relationships between species. Dr. Patricia Wu, the head of Earth's Xenopsychology Institute, had spent decades building detailed profiles of every major species in the galaxy. Her team knew how each species made decisions, what motivated them, what frightened them, and how they would likely react in different situations. The Vorthak Empire, for example, was built on a strict honor culture that valued strength and despised weakness. Their society was organized around military ranks, and their leaders maintained power by constantly proving their superiority over others. But like all honor cultures, it had critical weaknesses that could be exploited by someone who understood them. Admiral Burke smiled as he read Dr. Wu's analysis of Vorthak psychology. The Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest weakness. Their need to appear strong made them predictable. Their contempt for weaker species made them careless. Their rigid social structure made them inflexible. Communications. Burke called to his bridge crew. Send a message to all human vessels. Operation Looking Glass is now active. Operation Looking Glass had been designed by the best strategic minds on Earth. It wasn't a plan for winning battles through superior firepower. It was a plan for winning a war through superior understanding. Back on Harmony Point, Lisa was finishing her meeting with Ambassador Crix when her next appointment arrived. Fleet Commander Blue Wave of the Aquatic Union entered the office in her environmental suit, the water inside glowing with soft blue light. Ambassador Carter, Blue Wave said, her voice bubbling through her suit's speakers, "My people are deeply concerned about human actions. War is a serious matter. Many innocent beings could be harmed." "You're absolutely right," Lisa agreed. "War should always be a last resort. But tell me, Fleet Commander, what would you have done if someone demanded that your people abandon their homeworlds?" Blue Wave's colors shifted to deeper blue patterns that indicated thought. "We would fight to defend our territory naturally. Even against impossible odds? Honor requires that we defend our homes, regardless of the odds." "Then you understand our position," Lisa said. "We're not starting this war because we want to fight. We're fighting because the alternative is to abandon everything we've worked to build." "But the odds," Blue Wave began, "are indeed terrible," Lisa finished. "If this was simply a matter of ship counts and weapon strength, we would lose quickly and completely. But war isn't always decided by who has the biggest guns." In the Vorthak Empire, Admiral Kethmore was preparing his 7th Fleet for what he expected to be a very short campaign. Kethmore was a veteran of 17 military conflicts and had never lost a battle. He viewed the Human War Declaration as an opportunity to give his younger officers some easy combat experience. "The humans have 12 battlecruisers," he told his staff during their planning meeting. "We have 300 ships in the 7th Fleet alone. This will be over before it truly begins." His intelligence officer, a younger Vorthak named Sithnal, raised one of his arms hesitantly. "Admiral, should we be concerned about human tactics? They are a relatively unknown species." Kethmore's 3 eyes focused on the junior officer with amusement. "What tactics could they possibly have that we haven't seen before? They have been in space for less than a century. We have been fighting wars for thousands of years." "Yes, sir," Sithanal replied, lowering his arm. "But Admiral Kethmore's confidence would soon be tested in ways he could never imagine. The first human ships had already begun moving toward Vorthak space, and they weren't coming to fight the kind of war anyone expected." Captain Danny Rodriguez commanded the scout ship UES Ranger, one of humanity's smallest and fastest vessels. His orders were unlike anything in traditional military doctrine. Instead of seeking out enemy ships to destroy, he was looking for enemy ships to talk to. The Ranger dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Corval system, where a Vorthak supply convoy was refueling. Rodriguez opened communication channels on all frequencies and began broadcasting a message in perfect Vorthak language. "Attention Vorthak vessels," he announced. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the United Earth Federation. We wish to discuss terms of surrender." The response from the Vorthak convoy commander was immediate and predictably angry. "Human vessel, you are heavily outnumbered. Withdraw immediately or be destroyed." "I understand your position, Commander Vexthar," Rodriguez replied, using the Vorthak officer's name. "But before you make any hasty decisions, you might want to consider some information we have about your current situation." The use of his name clearly shocked the Vorthak commander. "How do you know my designation?" "Commander, we know a great many things. For example, we know that your supply convoy is carrying defective plasma regulators manufactured by the Kethdal Industrial Consortium. We know that these regulators will fail within the next 48 hours, leaving your ship stranded. We also know that your request for replacement parts was denied by Fleet Admiral Mortek because he believes you've been stealing fuel supplies." The silence from the Vorthak ships was deafening. Everything Rodriguez had said was completely accurate, and it was information that should have been impossible for humans to obtain. "We also know," Rodriguez continued, "that you've been having doubts about this war. You joined the military to protect Vorthak colonies from raiders, not to steal planets from peaceful species. You've been wondering if Admiral Kethamore's expansion plans are really in the best interests of your people." More silence. Then quietly, Commander Vexthar asked, "What do you want, human?" "Just to talk," Rodriguez replied. "We think you might be interested in some information about what's really happening in your empire, things your own government hasn't told you." Similar conversations were happening throughout Vorthak space as human ships appeared not to fight, but to share information. Information about corruption in the Vorthak. The war had been going on for 3 weeks and Admiral Kethmore was starting to feel confused. This was not how wars were supposed to work. In his 17 previous campaigns, the pattern had always been the same. Fleets would meet in space, weapons would fire, and the stronger force would win. Simple, clean, and predictable. This war was none of those things. His scouts reported human ships throughout Vorthak space, but they weren't attacking military targets. Instead, they were broadcasting messages on civilian communication channels. They were talking to supply convoy crews, mining station workers, and transport pilots. Somehow these humans knew personal details about individual Vorthak citizens that should have been impossible to obtain. Worse yet, the humans seemed to know about military secrets that even Kethmore's own officers didn't know about. They broadcast detailed information about supply shortages, equipment failures, and command disagreements. Information that was accurate and damaging. Captain Danny Rodriguez was currently executing one of the most unusual military operations in galactic history. His ship, the UES Ranger, had infiltrated the Mordak supply depot without firing a single shot. Instead of attacking the station, Rodriguez had requested permission to dock for humanitarian purposes. The station commander, Sub-Admiral Grixtal, had been curious enough to allow it. Now Rodriguez sat in the station's command center, drinking, something that passed for coffee among the Vorthak species, having what appeared to be a friendly conversation. "I have to ask," Rodriguez said, speaking perfect Vorthak. "How long have you been stationed here, Sub-Admiral?" 12 years, Grixtal replied, still somewhat stunned that a human could speak his language so fluently. "I was assigned here after the Vexmar campaign." "Ah, yes, where you distinguished yourself by saving the transport ships during the asteroid storm. That was excellent work." Rodriguez took another sip of his drink. "It's a shame your superiors never properly recognized your efforts." Grixtal's mandibles clicked in surprise. That incident had never been officially reported. His commanding officer at the time had taken credit for the rescue operation. "How could you possibly know about that?" Rodriguez smiled sadly. "Sub-Admiral, we know about a lot of things. For example, we know that Admiral Kethmore has been selling military supplies to private contractors and pocketing the profits. We know that the plasma weapons on your ships are operating at 60% efficiency because he's been buying cheaper components. We know that he's been falsifying battle reports to make himself look better to the high command." The sub-admirals, 3 eyes focused intently on Rodriguez. "Those are serious accusations. They're also completely true. And we can prove every word." Rodriguez reached into his jacket and pulled out a small data pad. "This contains financial records, communication, logs, and testimony from witnesses, everything you need to confirm what I'm telling you." Grixtal took the data pad with trembling hands. As he read through the information, his expression grew darker and darker. Everything Rodriguez had said was documented in detail. The corruption went far deeper than he had ever imagined. "Why are you showing me this?" Grixtal asked finally. "Because you're an honorable officer who joined the military to serve your people, not to make corrupt admirals wealthy. Because you deserve to know the truth about what you're really fighting for." Rodriguez stood up and walked to the viewing port that looked out over the supply depot. "Sub-Admiral, this war isn't about resources or territory. It's about a small group of powerful Vorthak using their military to grab more wealth and power. Your people are dying to make them richer. But our government says your government is being lied to by the same people who are lying to you." Rodriguez turned back to face the sub-admiral. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" Similar conversations were happening throughout Vorthak space. Commander Sarah Blake had convinced an entire patrol squadron to stand down after showing them evidence that their mission orders were being sent directly to human intelligence. Lieutenant Colonel Pete Morris had negotiated the surrender of a mining operation by proving that the workers were being poisoned by their own equipment, while their supervisors covered it up. The psychological warfare was having effects that went far beyond individual conversions. Vorthak military units were beginning to question their orders. Supply chains were breaking down as workers refused to cooperate with what they now saw as a corrupt system. Communication networks were flooded with leaked documents that exposed decades of lies and cover-ups. Back on Earth, Dr. Patricia Wu was coordinating the intelligence operation from her secure facility beneath the Xenopsychology Institute. Her walls were covered with charts and graphs showing Vorthak social structures, command hierarchies, and psychological profiles. "How are our conversion rates looking?" she asked her assistant, Dr. Kevin Park. "Better than projected," Park replied, looking at his tablet. "We've successfully turned 18% of contacted Vorthak military personnel. Another 32% are showing signs of doubt and confusion. The remainder are still loyal, but even they're starting to ask questions, Doctor." Wu nodded with satisfaction. The beauty of an honor-based culture is that once you show them their leaders are dishonorable, the whole system starts to collapse from within. Her communication console chimed with an incoming message from Ambassador Jake Harrison on Zentara Prime. The message was brief but significant. "Council meeting tomorrow. Several species requesting private meetings. Phase 2 is working." Phase 2 of the human strategy was indeed working better than anyone had dared hope. While the psychological warfare was targeting the Vorthak military directly, the diplomatic warfare was targeting their allies and supporters throughout the galaxy. Ambassador Lisa Carter had been busy on Harmony Point, meeting with representatives from species that had initially supported the Vorthak position. Her approach was elegant in its simplicity. She didn't threaten or bribe. She simply presented each species with detailed analyses of how Vorthak expansion would eventually affect their own interests. Her meeting with the Techno Collective had been particularly successful. The collective prized logical thinking above all else, so Lisa had presented them with mathematical models showing exactly how Vorthak territorial expansion would disrupt trade routes, resource flows, and technological development throughout their region of the galaxy. The probability of Vorthak expansion affecting collective interests within 50 years is 97.4%, she had explained. The probability of expansion affecting your core worlds within 100 years is 83.7%. The collective's representatives had spent 6 hours running their own calculations. When they finished, they reached the same conclusions Lisa had presented. The Vorthak Empire was a long-term threat to everyone, not just humans. Similar presentations were being made to the Aquatic Union, the Silicon Collective, and dozens of other species. Each presentation was carefully tailored to address the specific concerns and interests of each group. The humans had spent years learning what motivated each species, and now they were using that knowledge with surgical precision. The result was a gradual but steady shift in galactic opinion. Species that had initially viewed the Human War Declaration as foolish were beginning to see it as necessary. The Vorthak Empire was increasingly being viewed not as a legitimate government seeking resources, but as an aggressive threat to galactic stability. Chancellor Zexthol was feeling the pressure. 3 allied species had withdrawn their support for Vorthak expansion. 2 trade agreements had been suspended pending review of current political situations. The Galactic Bank had frozen several Vorthak accounts due to concerns about political stability. His military advisors were reporting increasingly strange problems. Supply convoys were arriving late or not at all. Communication networks were experiencing technical difficulties that seemed to affect only military channels. Morale reports from the front lines were becoming increasingly negative. "What is happening to our forces?" he demanded during an emergency council meeting. Admiral Kethmore, attending via holographic link, looked tired and frustrated. "Chancellor, the humans are conducting some form of psychological warfare that we have never encountered before. They seem to know details about our operations that should be impossible for them to obtain. Then stop them." "How?" "They're not attacking our ships or bases. They're talking to our people. They're sharing information. They're asking questions." Kethmore paused, his mandibles clicking with agitation. They're making our own soldiers think. Chancellor Zexthul slammed his tail against the floor. Soldiers are not supposed to think, they are supposed to obey. Yes, Chancellor, but apparently no one explained that to the humans. The situation was about to get much worse for the Vorthak Empire. Captain Rodriguez had just received new orders from Admiral Burke. Phase 3 of the human strategy was about to begin, and it would target the Empire's greatest weakness, the very thing that made them strong. Their rigid honor culture that demanded absolute loyalty to superiors was about to be turned against them in ways they never imagined possible. The humans had identified every corrupt official, every dishonorable leader, and every abuse of power within the Vorthak system, and they were about to. The meeting room on Techno-Collective Homeworld was unlike anything humans had ever seen before. The walls were made of living metal that shifted and flowed like water, and the air hummed with electronic signals that served as the collective's form of communication. Ambassador Jake Harrison sat across from Prime Node 774, trying not to show his amazement at the cybernetic being's complex mechanical form. "We have requested this meeting," Prime Node 774 said, its voice a mixture of organic and electronic sounds, "because our computational systems cannot explain current events. Human victory scenarios do not compute, yet humans continue to achieve impossible outcomes." Jake leaned forward slightly. "What makes you think our outcomes are impossible?" "Mathematical certainty. Vorthak Empire military strength exceeds human capabilities by factor of 25 to 1, yet Vorthak forces are experiencing systematic failure across all operational theaters. Our logic systems cannot identify the causative factors." "Perhaps your logic systems are asking the wrong questions," Jake suggested. The Prime Node's optical sensors focused more intently on Jake. "Explain." "Your systems are calculating based on traditional warfare models, ship counts, weapon strength, territorial control. But what if this isn't a traditional war? All conflicts are resource allocation disputes resolved through applied force." Jake smiled. "That's where you're wrong. This conflict is being resolved through applied understanding." Meanwhile, General Kate Murphy was conducting a briefing at Earth Defense Command that would have shocked every military academy in the galaxy. The walls of her briefing room were covered with psychological profiles, cultural analysis charts, and social network diagrams instead of battle maps and weapon specifications. "The key to understanding our strategy," she explained to the assembled officers, "is recognizing that every species has the same fundamental drives: survival, prosperity, and meaning. When you understand what truly motivates your opponent, you can predict their actions and counter them before they even decide what they're going to do." Colonel Andy Roberts raised his hand. "General, how does understanding motivation help us win battles?" "By making sure we never have to fight them in the first place," Murphy replied. "Watch this." She activated a holographic display showing a Vorthak fleet formation. "Admiral Kethmore is approaching the Kepler sector with his 7th Fleet. Traditional military thinking says we should meet him with our own fleet and engage in direct combat. We would lose that battle." The display shifted to show communication intercepts and psychological profiles. "But we know that Admiral Kethmore's greatest fear is appearing weak in front of his subordinates. We know that he has a personal rivalry with Admiral Vortak of the 3rd Fleet. We know that he's been falsifying reports to hide his failures in this campaign." Another officer, Major Lisa Hayes, looked confused. "How does knowing about his personal problems help us?" "Because we're going to use those problems to defeat him without firing a shot," Murphy explained. "Watch what happens when we broadcast certain information on military frequencies throughout Vorthak space." The holographic display showed a series of intercepted messages, all containing detailed information about Admiral Kethmore's failures, lies, and corruption. The messages were being transmitted from human ships throughout the Empire, but they were formatted to look like internal Vorthak communications. "Within 6 hours of this broadcast," Murphy continued, "Admiral Kethmore will receive orders from the High Command to return to the capital for questioning. His fleet will be reassigned to Admiral Vortak, who will be so eager to prove his superiority that he'll make predictable tactical mistakes." "And then we defeat Admiral Vortak?" Major Hayes asked. "No," Murphy smiled. Then we show Admiral Vortak, evidence that the High Command has been planning to remove him from command and blame him for Admiral Kethmore's failures. He'll turn around and attack his own capital, rather than face what he sees as betrayal. The room fell silent as the officers processed this information. They were witnessing a form of warfare that none of them had ever imagined possible. Back in Vorthak space, events were unfolding exactly as General Murphy had predicted. Admiral Kethmore stared at the communication from High Command, ordering his immediate return. His three eyes burned with rage as he realized that his carefully constructed lies had been exposed. But how? The information in the broadcast messages was accurate down to the smallest detail. Someone had access to his personal files, his private communications, even his secret financial records. The only explanation was that there was a spy network within the Vorthak military itself. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we're receiving multiple priority messages from fleet commanders throughout the Empire. They're all asking for clarification about the broadcast information. Kethmore's mandibles clicked with frustration. The damage was already done. Every officer in the Empire now knew about his corruption and failures. His reputation was destroyed, and with it, his ability to command effectively. Sir, Admiral Vortak of the Third Fleet is requesting permission to take command of our current operation. Denied, Kethmore snapped. I will not be replaced by that incompetent fool. But even as he spoke, Kethmore knew it was too late. The High Command would remove him from power, and Vortak would take credit for whatever happened next. Unless Captain Danny Rodriguez watched from his ship as the Vorthak fleet began to break formation. His sensors detected increasing communication, traffic between the ships, much of it on encrypted channels. The psychological warfare was working exactly as planned. Captain, his communications officer reported, we're detecting massive signal activity from the Vorthak fleet. It looks like they're arguing among themselves. Perfect, Rodriguez replied. Begin Phase 4. Broadcast the Vortak files on all frequencies. The new broadcast contained detailed information about Admiral Vortak's own corruption, his secret deals with civilian contractors, and his plans to eliminate political rivals within the military command structure. Most importantly, it included evidence that Vortak had been working with High Command to set up Admiral Kethmore as a scapegoat for the failed war effort. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Vorthak fleet, already confused and demoralized, began to fall apart completely. Some ships declared loyalty to Kethmore, others to Vortak, and still others announced that they were returning home to protect their families from what they now saw as a corrupt and dangerous government. On the diplomatic front, the effects were even more dramatic. The crystalline hegemony, ancient and wise, formally announced their withdrawal of support for Vorthak expansion efforts. Elder Quell made the announcement personally in a galaxy-wide broadcast. The hegemony has reviewed recent evidence regarding Vorthak Empire governance and military conduct, she declared, her crystalline form glowing with colors that indicated deep sadness. We find that this evidence reveals systemic corruption, abuse of power, and disregard for the welfare of Vorthak citizens themselves. We cannot support a government that lies to its own people. The Aquatic Union followed within hours, with Fleet Commander Blue Wave announcing that the Union was suspending all military cooperation agreements with the Vorthak Empire. The Silicon Collective, the Gas Giant Consortium, and 17 other major species made similar announcements within the same day. Chancellor Zexthal found himself facing the complete collapse of his alliance structure. Worse yet, the leaked information was causing unrest throughout Vorthak space itself. Citizens who had supported the war were beginning to question their government's motives. Military units were refusing orders from commanders they no longer trusted. How did the humans obtain this information? He demanded during an emergency session of his war council. We believe they have been conducting intelligence operations for decades, replied Intelligence Director Mexstar. Every cultural exchange, every trade mission, every diplomatic contact was apparently part of a comprehensive information-gathering effort. Impossible. We would have detected such operations. Not if they weren't operations in the traditional sense, Mexstar explained reluctantly. What if their diplomats, traders, and scientists were simply doing their jobs while also observing and learning? What if they were collecting information that was freely available, but that we never thought to protect because we didn't realize its strategic value? The Chancellor's tail lashed with fury. You're telling me that the humans have been spying on us by being friendly? Yes, Chancellor. I believe that's exactly what they've been doing. Meanwhile, Ambassador Jake Harrison was concluding his meeting with Prime Node 774. The cybernetic being had spent several hours processing the information Jake had provided about human strategic thinking. Your species has developed an approach to conflict that our systems had not previously considered, the Prime Node admitted. You wage war not against bodies or machines, but against ideas and loyalties. We wage war against the causes of conflict itself, Jake corrected gently. We're not trying to destroy the Vorthak people. We're trying to free them from leaders who don't serve their interests. And you believe this approach will result in victory? Jake stood up to leave. Prime Node 774, we believe this approach will result in something much better than victor. Chancellor Zexthul made his final desperate decision on a day when 3 more star systems declared independence from the Vorthak Empire. His advisors had abandoned him, his military was in chaos, and his allies had all turned away. But he still had one card left to play. Prepare the Imperial fleet for immediate departure to Earth, he ordered his remaining loyal officers. If we cannot control our own territory, we will at least make the humans pay for what they have done to us. The Imperial fleet was the pride of the Vorthak Empire. 50 of their most powerful ships, including the massive dreadnought Eternal, Glory. If Chancellor Zexthul could destroy Earth, he could at least claim that he had made the humans suffer for their victory. Admiral Ryan Burke received the intelligence report about the approaching Vorthak fleet while he was having breakfast, in his cabin aboard the UES Constitution. He read through the details calmly, then activated his communication system. All ships, this is Admiral Burke. The Vorthak Imperial fleet is approaching Earth. All units proceed to coordinates as planned. Remember, today we end this war not with destruction, but with understanding. The human fleet that moved to intercept the Vorthak ships was smaller than anyone expected. Only 20 vessels led by Admiral Burke's flagship. But as they approached Earth, something unprecedented happened. Ships began appearing from hyperspace around them. Not human ships, but vessels, from 47 different species. The crystalline hegemony sent their crystal ships that sparkled like jewels in space. The Aquatic Union brought their flowing, water-like vessels. The Techno-Collective arrived with their geometric, perfectly logical ship designs. Captain Danny Rodriguez, now commanding the escort vessel UES Freedom, opened communication channels to the approaching Vorthak fleet. But instead of threats or demands for surrender, he broadcast something completely different. Chancellor Zexthul, Rodriguez said, speaking in perfect Vorthak. My name is Danny Rodriguez. I want to speak to you personally, not as an enemy, but as one being to another. On the bridge of the Eternal Glory, Chancellor Zexthul stared at the massive Allied fleet surrounding his ships. He had expected to find Earth defended only by human vessels. Instead, he found nearly half the galaxy standing together against him. What do you want, human? The Chancellor replied, his voice filled with bitterness. I want to offer you something that no one has offered you in a very long time. Rodriguez answered. I want to offer you the truth. What truth? The truth about your own people, Chancellor. The truth about what they really want and need. Rodriguez activated a holographic display that was broadcast to every ship in both fleets. The display showed detailed surveys of Vorthak civilian populations from across the Empire. The surveys had been conducted secretly by human intelligence agents, but they revealed something remarkable. The majority of Vorthak citizens opposed the war. They wanted peace, prosperity, and the chance to raise their families without fear. They were tired of military expansion that brought them nothing but higher taxes and dead relatives. They wanted leaders who would focus on building a better society instead of conquering new territories. This is impossible, Chancellor Zexthul protested. My people support our glorious expansion. Your government told you they supported it, Rodriguez corrected gently. But did anyone ever ask them what they actually wanted? The broadcast continued, showing intercepted communications from Vorthak families, workers, and even military personnel. The messages painted a picture of a society that was exhausted by constant warfare and desperate for change. Admiral Burke joined the communication from his flagship. "Chancellor, we're not here to destroy your fleet or conquer your empire. We're here to offer you something better." "And what is that?" "A future," Burke replied simply. "A future where your people can live in peace and prosperity. A future where the Vorthak Empire becomes the Vorthak Republic, governed by leaders who actually serve their citizens' interests." The broadcast shifted to show detailed plans for political reform within Vorthak space. The plans had been developed by human political scientists working with Vorthak dissidents and opposition groups. They outlined a transition to democratic government that would preserve Vorthak culture while eliminating the corruption and militarism that had caused so much suffering. "We have been in communication with reform leaders throughout your empire," Admiral Burke continued. "They are ready to implement these changes, but they need legitimacy. They need you to step down voluntarily and endorse the transition." Chancellor Zexthal was silent for a long moment. Around him, his bridge crew listened to the human proposals with growing interest. Several of his officers exchanged glances that suggested they found the ideas appealing. "And if I refuse?" the Chancellor finally asked. "Then you will return to an empire that no longer exists," Burke replied sadly. "Your remaining loyal systems are already declaring independence. Your military commanders are joining the reform movement. Your people are demanding change. You can either be part of building something better, or you can be remembered as the leader who tried to destroy his own people, rather than let them be free." The communication channels fell silent as Chancellor Zexthal considered his options. He looked around his bridge at officers who had served him loyally for years. He saw doubt in their eyes, but also hope. Hope for something better than endless war and expansion. Captain Rodriguez spoke again, his voice gentle but firm. "Chancellor, you joined the military to serve your people. This is your chance to serve them in the greatest way possible. Help us build a peace that will last for generations." On his personal communication channel, Chancellor Zexthal received a message from his own son, who was serving as a junior officer on one of the fleet ships. The message was brief. "Father, please, let us go home to a better world." The Chancellor closed his eyes and made his decision. "Attention all Vorthak vessels," he announced on fleet-wide communications. "This is Chancellor Zexthal. By my authority as leader of the Vorthak Empire, I hereby order all military units to stand down and return to home ports. The war is over." He paused, then continued with words that would be remembered throughout galactic history. "Furthermore, I am announcing my resignation as Chancellor and my support for the establishment of a new Vorthak government based on the reform proposals presented by the human representatives." The celebration that followed was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Not a celebration of military victory, but a celebration of transformation. The Vorthak fleet didn't surrender. They joined the Allied forces in escorting reform leaders to the Vorthak capital to begin the transition to democratic government. 6 months later, Ambassador Jake Harrison stood before the Galactic Council, once again. But this time he was speaking from the central platform, not from the shadows. The human seat had been moved to the inner circle, recognizing humanity's new status as a major galactic power. The war between the United Earth Federation and the Vorthak Empire has taught us all something important, Jake told the assembled representatives. "Strength is not measured by the size of your military or the power of your weapons. True strength comes from understanding, compassion, and the courage to do what is right, even when it seems impossible." The new Vorthak representative, elected President Vexthar, the same former sub-admiral who had been converted by Captain Rodriguez months earlier, stood to address the council. "The human species has given my people something we had forgotten we could have," President Vexthar said. "They gave us hope. They showed us that our enemies could become our friends, that our conflicts could become opportunities for growth, and that our differences could make us stronger instead of dividing us." Elder Quell of the Crystalline Hegemony spoke next. "The humans have demonstrated a form of warfare that does not destroy but heals. They have shown us that true victory comes not from defeating your enemies, but from helping them become better than they were. The session concluded with the establishment of the Galactic Understanding Initiative, a human-led program designed to prevent future conflicts through cultural exchange, psychological research, and diplomatic innovation. Dr. Patricia Wu was appointed as the first director, while Admiral Burke was asked to establish a new military academy that would teach the principles of transformational warfare. As the council session ended, Jake Harrison walked through the corridors of the great Crystal Dome. No longer in the shadows but in the bright light of the central areas, representatives from dozens of species approached him to express their gratitude and to request human assistance with their own conflicts and challenges. The galaxy had learned something profound. The greatest weapon humans possessed was not in their ships or their technology, but in their ability to see their enemies as people who could be understood, helped, and ultimately transformed. And in learning that lesson, the galaxy itself had been transformed.